Yeah, I had one player who I got called to see. I wasn't working with the team directly, but the team reached out, and I saw him where he basically had to stop his season, fly to Korea, and basically took the rest of the year off because he was having such severe nerve pain by the time I saw him.
This is Dr. Jordan, a physical therapist who's worked with all of your favorite esports teams. In this episode of The LS Show, we debunk common myths about healthy gaming habits.
But I don't think posture matters all that much at all. I think habits are much more important.
The importance of injury prevention when gaming.
Now, prevalence of pain, like discomfort, all that stuff, very, very high.
And the behind the scenes of a doctor's life working with esports professionals.
I watched Blabber jungling once, and he didn't blink for over 45 seconds.
So I'm joined with Dr. Respawn, Jordan. He's a doctor in physical therapy, and he works with a lot of teams in Pro League of Legends. I'm not sure if you work with anything else, but at least in League of Legends, you worked with some teams. You worked with Cloud9. I think you also worked with EG. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about injuries, because it's something that's been brought up recently with Faker having his injuries and missing some time last year. Mm-hmm. So Jordan, talk to me a little bit about what causes injuries when you're playing video games. I'm a rock climber, and I know exactly what causes injuries, right? I'll like pull something, I'll do a wrong movement, or like I'll miss the hold, then like I'll just kind of, skin my skin. I know exactly why I get hurt when I'm climbing. But when I'm playing video games, all of a sudden one day I just feel a little ting, and then it gets worse. Why does that happen?
Yeah, you kind of hit it right there. So the unique thing about gaming is that there are almost no incidents of trauma. And so almost every injury that you see is a gradual buildup of stress, overuse, and poor mechanics, whatever it is. It's a buildup over time. So nobody ever really hurts themselves playing one game. They hurt themselves playing hundreds of thousands of games over a course of time and never correcting the things that are slowly kind of degenerating or getting worse as they go, right? And that's sort of kind of where I come in. A lot of what I do with players is education, trying to set up ergonomics, trying to set up good habits, and then teaching them exercises that either alleviate pain or build enough capacity for them to do what they keep doing without developing an overuse injury or something like, repetitive stress injuries.
And why does the injury happen in a specific place? So I noticed if I'm holding a mouse and after a while, like maybe my hand gets tired, but it might just be like one finger or one specific area and not all my fingers, despite me using, having the hand on the mouse. Is there a specific like when you were talking about ergonomics, I'm assuming there's a reason why the pressure is all in one point, or maybe that's just one kind of injury?
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of different types of injuries. Like many things, everyone's built different. Everyone has a slightly different grip on their mouse. Everyone has slightly different tissue tolerance. Somebody who plays with slightly different mechanics is going to be they're going to be applying different load or different stress to their body, right? So when you say, okay, I feel in one spot, what that usually tells me is that helps me hone in. Okay, what are you doing different? So the first thing I like to do is a movement analysis. I'll look at how they hold the mouse. I'll look at how they click the mouse. I'll watch them just play. I'm like, hey, go in the practice tool, and I want you to set up some minis. I want you to just last hit for a little bit. And I look at what they do. Because when they start focusing on game tasks, they're no longer thinking about being perfect, with their posture and their mouse and all that. They just start playing like they normally do. A lot comes out. There's no right or wrong way to look at it. Like, oh, this is the best mouse grip. This is the worst way. What I look at is, does the way that they do whatever it is that they're doing, does that directly tell me something that relates to their symptoms? So if you're having let's say an index finger issue, and then I notice that, wow, you use your index finger, but you use it on the right click button, right? And you're clicking with your index finger because that's more natural to you. Well, but the mouse is not designed for that. The mouse is designed for the right click to be a middle finger. So what you're doing is actually deviating your hand away from an anatomical neutral position, and you're doing this. That's going to become hyper irritating to that joint. And so a lot of it is very nuanced and individualized to what it is that I see. But, there are things that I see where a player might have their mouse starting in this position because of the orientation of their arm. And then they wonder why after a few hours, their thumb is hurting. I'm like, well, you're starting with basically no range of motion here. Every time you move your mouse to the right, you're jamming that joint together, and you do that 5,000 times a session, that starts to get annoying. And that's why I say most gaming injuries are preventable, because if we identify what is causing the issue, it's really easy to fix a lot of it. And as long as you kind of get ahead of it and fix it and stop applying that stress, the body's going to heal, and it's going to basically not become an issue long term.
So when you say that injuries are preventable, is it, from your experience, is it normally that people are doing wrong things that causes them to get an injury, like what you were saying with like using your index finger to right click? Or is it maybe also repetitive nature? The first thing that came to my mind was FBI. At some point, they were showing his like POV back when we had ProView, and he would just spam the tab button, or was it the Z button? Yeah, he was just spamming the chat.
He kept opening it. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and it was disturbing. You couldn't see what was happening, and I can just imagine like, oh, if he does that with his pinky and his pinky hurts, that makes sense.
Right.
So
right.
Is it more?
That's what it is. It's so that's what I mean is that nothing is traumatic, meaning him doing that once is never going to cause him a problem, right? Pretty much never. But 10,000 times, now you're going to maybe take a one, let's say, like, to throw numbers out, 0.01% irritation, right, on a scale. If 100% irritation results in an injury, then every single time you do this, it results in a 0.01. If you do that a million times, you're going to suddenly have issues. If you do it 10 times, there's no problem. So everything in gaming, I say, is preventable because it's always related to the duration and the amount of time that you spend doing it without rest, without breaks, without recovery. So a concept I try to train everyone in is understanding that stress has two things. It's stress accrual rate and stress recovery rate. And when I say stress, I'm mostly talking about mechanical stress, not like, oh, I'm stressed at work. Like, mechanical stress accrues at a certain rate based on what you're doing, the intensity you're doing it, the duration, and as well as the ergonomics. That's where ergonomics comes in. Good ergonomics means that your stress accrual rate goes up slower. It's a much lower stress accrual rate. If you're sitting with terrible posture and all this stuff like this, your stress accrual rate on some of these joints and muscles in your body are going to be significantly higher than with good posture. And then stress recovery rate obviously is just what are you doing to reduce the amount of stress that's naturally built up over the course of time that you've been doing something. Nothing is free, right? So even with perfect posture, perfect ergonomics, everything, if you play a video game for 8 hours, you are building up a certain degree of stress in your body regardless. Having everything set up correctly will make that less than someone who doesn't, but you still have to think, well, you've accrued this amount of tissue wear, let's say, or I don't like to use the word damage because that sends off all sorts of like red warning signs in people. But you've accrued this much stress in your body. You have to give it time to recover, and you can speed that stuff up, right? So stretches, icing, there's a lot of ways to improve your recovery rate through stuff you can do. And as long as those even out, you don't have a problem. The problem is when people's stress accrual rate exceeds the stress recovery rate, and then they keep doing this day in, day out. Now you have a certain degree of stress that isn't being recovered and is adding up over time. That's when the injuries occur.
It makes so much sense. The first thing I imagine when you say that, I'm a teaching gamer, is in Genshin Impact, if you're sprinting and you go all the way to the end of your like sprint bar, it's on a lot of games, you can't sprint anymore and you have to wait a very long time for your sort of like sprint bar to recover. It almost sounds like it's the same thing. If you keep just doing the same thing without letting it rest or helping it recover, then at some point you're going to get to that point where it's like, okay, now you are either injured or you need to give it a very long time to recover.
Exactly. Yeah.
How does one go about strengthening those muscles? Because I just assume if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, well, then those muscles are going to get stronger and then I'm not going to have to worry about it. But that it doesn't seem like that's what's happening.
Yeah. So to answer that, you kind of have to understand a little bit about how muscles function. A good comparison would be like running a marathon, right? Or doing anything that's a repetitive task. A lot of runners injure themselves because they think in order to increase the distance I can run safely, I need to increase the distance I'm running. You can see the paradox in that, right? Like, in order to run 10 miles, I have to be training 12 miles a day so I can run the 10 miles safely. That doesn't really make sense. Like, you're stressing your body to voice. What's more important is thinking about what is required for me to run the 10 miles in terms of, and then you do specific strengthening of muscles needed to do that task. So most runners that I train, I would strengthen their glutes, I would strengthen their hamstrings, I would strengthen their calves in order to allow them when they're running to use less force or generate more force with less stress in order to make the workload relatively easier to accomplish the 10 miles. So same thing in gaming, you got to think, just to use keyboard mouse as an example, because that's probably the most common. What muscles are you using to control your mouse? You're using, your left and right control, right? So in the forearm, and you're also using the muscles that govern extension and flexion of the fingers, which would be your extensors and flexors relative to the hand, right? So respective to the hand. So whatever is clicking needs to be strengthened, and you can't do that by just clicking more. What you need to be doing is applying stress. You need to be applying resistance so that the body realizes that the current capacity is insufficient for the task. And so that's why doing bicep curls like this with no weight will not result in large muscles. You have to add resistance.
All right, that clicked with me. Yeah.
The stimulus needs to exceed what you're doing in order for the body to recognize it as I need to change. And that's what I try to. I get philosophical about this stuff, but all training is a stimulus. You don't build muscles in the gym. You build muscles when you recover, but you only recover and build muscles if you applied the right stimulus earlier on to trigger the body to say that whatever I have now is not enough. I need to increase my strength, increase my muscle mass in order to accomplish that task. And that's why training regularity is super important. You never build muscle by training one day and killing yourself in the gym. You build it over time, because over time you are telling your body now, this current strength level I have is not enough. And the body's really good at understanding that and be like, oh, well, you know what we need to do? We need to build more muscle. And so if you want to strengthen the muscles that you use when you're gaming, you have to be doing resistance exercises using those exact same muscles and then translate it functionally to what you're doing in game.
You can now become a member of my channel to get early access to all my videos, private polls, chat rooms, and updates, and to say in what direction I take my content in. So make sure to check it out. That makes so much sense. Just saying it in like very plain words, especially that like bicep curl analogy was just like hit the nail on the head. The other thing that you mentioned, I want to kind of go back to it, is like posture. Mm-hmm. And we see this a lot where it's like, oh, you're on TikTok all the time. You're like, your neck is out like that and it causes injuries. I would say that for most people that I see, it's like very mild or inconvenient pain. It never becomes an actual issue. Now, a pro who it seemed like it was a big issue to was like Uzi, right? And unfortunately, he had to cut his career short because the injuries were too bad. At least that was my understanding of the problem. What would you say is the importance of posture when it comes to like playing video games? I know a lot of people play on like console as well, but at least like on PC, how much does it actually matter is my question, because I have bad posture and I never really feel like it bothers me, but maybe I'm saying this until it bothers me. I don't know.
No. This is actually a hot take, but I don't think posture matters all that much at all. I think habits are much more important. I've had a few tweets about this where I talk about how habit formation is much more important than good posture, because if you had perfect posture and you sat like that, like a statue for 10 hours, I guarantee you're going to feel miserable after, right? Because the body likes movement. Joints, synovial joints, are the majority of joints in your body. Synovial means that they are two bones that meet in contact to create the joint, and around that is a fluid sac. That sac traps nutrients and fluid in the joint, and the way that those nutrients get like imparted to the cartilage is through pressure change. And so if you're not moving, you are increasing, essentially you're starving your joints of nutrients until you move. And that's why discomfort builds. And that's why your body will naturally shift. When you're sleeping, you'll naturally move. It's always trying to create a little bit of movement in order to alleviate pressure zones, all that stuff, and just keep fluid moving through the body. Our entire body system is designed around movement. Without movement, everything falls apart. And that's why you see people in hospital beds who are comatose developing pressure injuries, developing all sorts of massive, massive health issues in a very short amount of time. So when you think about posture, what's more important is varying your posture. I usually recommend, active posture versus, relaxed postures when gaming. So if you're in game and you want to lean forward, you change your posture to be more in game. When you're done, you switch your posture, you go more relaxed, watch the VOD or whatever. And I'll give you a hack too. So mechanically, the reason that gamers tend to have their neck forward is actually a direct result of trying to use the back of the chair. And this is where ergonomics has failed gaming in a lot of ways, because they said, oh, a perfectly ergonomic chair will support your back. Everything is lined up. You'll sit fully supported. Nobody plays a game like this, right? I've seen maybe 5% of players I've ever worked with who literally play like this. It's so rare, right? Most people play like this. Now, the reason they sit like this is because they're still trying to use the back of the chair because they haven't moved from when they were waiting in champ select. Okay, now they're in game. They do this. They start playing. What I always tell them is if you just scoot forward and bring your knees down, you're still leaning forward now. But what happened was my lower back straightness, I'm no longer touching the back of my chair. And automatically my neck came back. And I don't have to think about it. The reason your neck goes forward, it's a biomechanical relationship of your back being rounded. Your head is trying to counterweight the weight of your body in order to keep you aligned. Now, if you sit with a perfectly straight back and bring your head forward, you literally can't hold that forward position anymore, right? So it's not that anyone has bad posture. They're putting themselves in a situation or an environment in which they don't have a choice but to adopt this posture. If you don't use the back of the chair and you sit with your legs forward and your feet down, now your lower back naturally straightens and your neck will straighten with it because there's no reason for it to be forward. It just aligns. Now, it's a lot more work sitting like that. So usually when I play like that, I'll only do it for the game. And then afterwards, I scoot my hips back and I relax. And then I can lean back and then the ergonomics come into play. So variability is way more important. I usually tell players not to mess with their posture when it counts. So I use, like I said, the stuff I do is very, very nuanced to high level gaming because I don't want to change things that might affect performance. Something that I tell teams I work with very early on is my job is actually not player health. My job is player performance. And oftentimes player performance is tied directly to player health. But if I was to optimize player health as a priority, performance ends up suffering. Right. So I don't want to do anything that's going to negatively affect a player's performance in scrims or on stage. Anything I tell them to try changing in terms of, I want you to turn your keyboard, I want you to readjust your chair, all that stuff. I'm like, you do that in solo queue and you play with it in solo queue until you get used to it. And then you feel comfortable with it. You can take it into scrims. You can take it into your actual on stage games. But for the vast majority, I don't touch anything unless they have a problem. I've played with, I've worked with Valorant players who literally have their keyboard here and their monitor is in front of their face and their arm is like this. And they play like a Demon 1. Oh my God. If you watch that guy play, he's like this.
Oh, God.
Then I asked him, I was like, well, when I first met him and he was on EG Academy, I was like, are you having, he's like, I did a posture assessment on all of them. And he's like, okay, you're going to freak out because my posture is terrible. I was like, let me see it. And he does that. And I'm like, do you have pain? He's like, no. I'm like, don't change it then. Let me know when you have issues. And then I told him, these are the things I would expect though. If you feel this, these are the stretches you do. All right. And that was it. He never had an issue. He went on to win a freaking championship. Like, so I always tell players, like, the last thing I want to do is tell you to do something that makes you play worse. I'm not going to tell you to change something unless I think it's directly related to an issue that you're having, because at that point you're already playing worse because you have nerve pain in your hand. Right now we have to change it. Now I can't be like, oh, just keep playing like that, until it gets worse. Like that doesn't make any sense. But if you're not having a problem, no, I think play as you are. Just understand that after you play, you need to be doing certain things to take some of that stress away. So to go back to my example about stress accrual, right? So Demon 1 playing like that, it's not that he's going to have a problem playing 1 or even 5 or even 20 games. It's just that long term, if he plays 1,000 games like that, the stress on his body is so much greater in certain areas than someone with good posture playing 1,000 games that it will start to add up. And so when you talk about career longevity, then this stuff starts to matter. And so when players go into off season, then I kind of change gears. I'm like, off season is when you fix all this stuff. Do not go into a 2-month period where literally games don't matter at all and just keep playing the way you are. That's when you fix everything. And then hopefully it becomes habitual. And then you get back into season. Now you have improved mechanics. You have improved setup. You're used to it. And it's not going to be foreign for you. So
I do want to get into what you were talking about of how to sort of relieve the stretches that you tell people to do to like relieve that stress. But before that, I actually want to ask, how prevalent are these issues with pro players, at least in the League of Legends or just in general? We don't hear too many people complaining about it, but then sometimes you'll hear it's like, oh yeah, my wrist is hurting, but it seems like maybe they'll work with you and then they'll fix it. How prevalent are injuries, or maybe not serious injuries, but problems like feeling pain?
Yeah. I will say the way that I worked, and a lot of the other healthcare professionals in esports work, is on a preventative basis. So they will try to see players every week to stay ahead of this stuff. And like I said, I work with a lot of them actually at 1HP, and we all kind of have the same philosophy that this stuff is preventable. And so a lot of the problems you don't hear about because they never become full-blown problems. Now, prevalence of pain, like discomfort, all that stuff, very, very high. Like almost every single player has some degree of neck stiffness or pain and some degree of wrist and arm discomfort after scrims and after solo queue and stuff. This is just, but anyone who's played League of Legends, what happens when you play 5 games of League in a row? You don't feel 100%, like your neck is stiff, all that stuff, right? So they just have the advantage of having someone come in and work on all that. So we'll do a lot of manual therapy. I do a lot of like soft tissue release. I'll do joint mobilizations. I will teach them a few like stretches and just range of motion type exercises, strengthening to alleviate that. And the idea is that you're trying to preserve 100% functionality for them for the course of the season. From my experience, it's almost impossible to get them to Worlds with 100% disability free. Like every player, by the time they get to Worlds, is probably feeling at least 5 to 10% discomfort, because it's such a long season, right? Especially for the teams that I was working with, where both, EG and C9 were regularly going to MSI. And that immediately just it exponentially increases the stress on your body because you don't get that break. And so when you think about stress accrual, especially with suboptimal setup, whatever it is, like if a player has poor posture and all this stuff, that break is absolutely critical, because the way that this stuff usually goes is more exponential than it is linear. And so if you never get that break, your rate of stress in the summer is significantly higher than someone who did get a break at MSI, had a month off. They're basically coming into summer 100%.
That makes sense. So it's the more you play, the more stress you put on your body. So that actually kind of lines up. It is interesting that you haven't heard any complaints from like C9 members. You were working with them, so that says good stuff about that. When you were talking about like doing like strengthening exercises or releasing stress, is that just stretches that you do? Because that's sort of one thing that we've heard like since I think maybe like 2015 or 2014, when I think people first started caring. I was like, oh, you have to do all these stretches, you have to do like these guys and those guys, and I'm not very good with them. But is it mainly stretches, or are there other things that you do to?
Warm-ups are important, and warm-ups sort of tie into cooldown as well. But I like active range of motion, moving through range. One of the most aggravating things for a joint or a tendon is repetitive movement at a fraction of the range available. So to go back to the biceps example, if I give you a 5-pound weight and I had you hold it and then do this for an hour where you're just making micro movements with it, it gets very irritable very quickly. After a while, all you want to do is like stretch your elbow out, right? Like actually move through range. That's essentially what's going on with your mouse finger. You're clicking 1,000 times a game and moving through like, 5% of the available range. Afterwards, the best thing you can do is just kind of move it through that full range. And oftentimes players have said, oh yeah, when I do that, like I feel a click. I'm like, yeah, that's the tendon going through a pulley system that is really stiff. And so the more you do that, the less it'll click. But you got to like be thinking about making sure you're maintaining your range, because the activities you're doing use so little of it. And just generally, again, it goes back to also the thing I was talking about, synovial joints, fluid movement. You feel a lot of relief just moving through range. So in addition to stretching, which I think is important, stretching is sort of, I think in the gaming community, a little bit overemphasized. A lot of players that I've worked with actually have hypermobility. So stretching, and I had a whole tweet thread today about this, but hypermobility means if you stretch, you are increasing mobility even more. You're probably going to feel worse in some people. If a muscle is weak, and you stretch it, what you do is you actually inhibit its ability to function. So now you've exacerbated that weakness by stretching it, making it even weaker. And then you wonder why you're never feeling better. So people with chronically sore and tight trapezius muscles after you've been on a computer for a while, and they're always like, I keep stretching it and it never goes away. I'm like, yeah, you actually need to strengthen those muscles because they are so fatigued by the weight of holding your arms up, and you keep stretching them, and it alleviates a little bit of the tension initially, but then you keep doing what you're doing, like it's giving up. It's basically just going to cramp up on you now, and so it's going to be constantly irritated unless you can build more strength and more capacity so that the weight of your arms feels lighter relatively.
That's very interesting. You specifically mentioned the trapezius muscle. I had a injury with like my trapezius muscle, I don't know, quite a long time ago. And for the longest time, I just didn't know what was causing the pain. And I think what happened was when I drive, I kind of put my hand on like at 12 o'clock. And after a while, it just became very painful. And I would try to stretch it. Nothing, it wouldn't help. And then I was like, I just don't understand what's causing this pain. And finally, I went to a doctor and he was like, oh, it's probably your trapezius muscles, just the muscle that kind of lifts your hands up. And so I was like, okay, I'm just never going to lift my hand above my shoulder. And I did that for a few years instead of going to therapy, which not very smart. But then I went to therapy and I actually had trauma of putting my hand above my head. So like if I saw someone changing a light bulb, I would start feeling pain.
Okay, that's a whole other sympathetic pain. Pain is really interesting. We can go to a whole like side tangent on pain. Pain is multifactorial. People oftentimes attribute pain to tissue injury when we know that's not the case, right? Like you can have a sensation of pain without an injury. And there's a strong correlation to stress, anxiety, depression, and that kind of stuff with pain manifestations. So when you're stressed or anxious, you tend to feel more pain. The example I always use is when you have the flu, right? You undergo kind of a lot of people get what's called allodynia, or the sensations become painful. So like you take a shower and like your skin hurts and you're like, this should not hurt. This is just it's like warm water on my skin. It should not be causing me physical pain, but it does. That can happen with psychological sympathetic simulation of pain, where you see something and you imagine doing it. It actually causes you to feel it. Yeah, the brain's super powerful with that kind of stuff. But to go back to your point about like the tightness, yeah, I usually attribute tightness if it's not directly training related. Like if you were just carrying 70-pound boxes for 3 hours and you're tight after, I mean, that makes sense, right? But if you're feeling tightness all the time, tight muscles generally indicate relative weakness. And so the treatment for tight muscles is generally strengthening, not stretching. You can stretch after to alleviate some of the discomfort, but you will not change long-term unless you strengthen those muscles.
Yeah, and that's what the therapist told me. He said, the first thing we're going to do is forget all the stretching that you were doing. Like, let's just not even work on that muscle. Let's work on the muscles around that. And let's just stabilize that area, and then we'll move forward. And I found that when I started going to the gym and whatnot, the issues sort of got a lot better. And then when I did the physical therapy, it's completely gone. So I really didn't expect that kind of, it wasn't like a stress injury or a traumatic injury. It was just something that happened over time. So one thing we were talking about earlier was that the unique thing, or you were mentioning, the unique thing about these sort of injuries is that it can happen to anyone, who puts in the time. And you were giving the example of like an NFL player. If you're playing in like collegiate, you're not going to get as injured, or you're not going to put as much stress on your body as someone in the NFL or NBA is. But when you're playing video games, as long as you're playing the same amount of hours, you're going to get the same amount of stress, which is crazy to think. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause like when you think about, any high level pro playing the game, mechanically, it's the same thing, right? You're clicking the same keys. You might click maybe less than they do, or maybe more, depending on how you play. But the overall rough mechanical stress on the body is about the same between a pro or a bronze player, and so it's all about the amount of hours. It's all about the setup. And so more players need to be thinking of their body kind of in the same way that pros do, which is, if I want to put in 6 hours in a grind, 6 to 10 hours, a lot of streamers, I actually see more musculoskeletal issues in streamers than I do pros, because streamers actually play more hours. They're monetarily incentivized to stream way longer hours. You never see a pro doing a 24-hour gaming session. That they just know that's terrible, but streamers do it all the time, you know. So it's the same, you know. And then for all those of us who, you know, who grew up degenerate gamers, that was me. You know, I was that kid in high school too. I played 12 straight hours and in the middle of the night, you know, for no reason. When you do that to yourself, you just have to understand like the consequence of it. And it's not that gaming itself is a high intensity thing. It's not, but time and duration and the frequency at which you keep doing that, it really does add up. So I would say the most common things I see are overuse injuries and nerve issues. And nerve irritation in gaming is generally a result of just poor posture mechanics and repetitive stress over and over, irritating the nerve.
Oh, can you elaborate a little bit? How do you end up hurting your nerve? I can understand ligaments and tendons and muscles, but how I imagine nerve issue is like a pinching.
Yeah, so maybe it helps to talk about what nerves are even. So nerves are, think of like a shoestring or like a cord running out of your spine, out of your neck, down into all the different areas of your body, right? If you have a cord that gets chronically tight because of adhesions that build up because you never go through full range of motion, they get shortened, they get very tight, and you keep like grabbing the end of them and pulling on it. Yeah, they get really irritated. And so a lot of players have nerve mobility issues anyway. And there's easy tests for that. You can do all these different motions and see, oh, when do I get some tingling? If your nerve mobility is already deficit, and then you start irritating it with repetitive stress, and you have your desk here and it pinches down onto the nerve and you create all these little entrapment points. Yeah, nerves get super irritated. And then once the difference between like a muscle, a tendon, and a nerve is that once a nerve gets irritated, you are going to be dealing with that for a while. It's not going to be a quick solution, and it's not very easy to calm nerves down unless you stop doing what you're doing.
Oh, so nerves are kind of like the one place you really don't want to irritate.
Yeah. So any players I work with, if I do an assessment on them, like I'm getting arm pain or whatever, if the second I determine it's a nerve, it becomes a much more immediate type solution. I don't want to sit around, oh, let's just see how this goes. Like it's okay, you need to do this. So we start the process of calming things down, because it might take anywhere from days to weeks to months, depending on the severity.
Oh, wow.
I had one player who I got called to see. I wasn't working with the team directly, but the team reached out and I saw him where he basically had to stop his season, fly to Korea, and basically took the rest of the year off because he was having such severe nerve pain by the time I saw him.
Wow.
And the good thing is, he did all his stuff. He did his rehab, and now he's playing Tier 1 Valorant again, and he's on one of the best teams in the world. But he got back. It was fine. So like I said, it's all preventable. You just have to understand, now if I had seen him a month before, he probably would have been fine, because there were some significant things about the way he was playing that was contributing to all that. But when you don't know what to do, you just keep pushing through it. It just gets worse and worse and worse.
Man, that's really scary, I guess, that at least personally, if I started feeling pain, I just stop, but that's their job. And so they don't have an option to just say, oh, I'm going to take today off or the next week off and let my fingers rest.
And it's not even like, oh, I just won't practice as much, because you're in esports, you're sort of like under the pressure of constant performing. And if you're not performing above the people right behind you, you're going to get replaced. And so it's really, really hard for a lot of these guys to take time off or to cut back. And, and that's why when I work with a lot of players, I try to structure it around, if we need to reduce playtime, we have to determine what playtime is most reducible. And then how do we replace it? So I've worked with players where I felt the need to cut back on their overall gaming time. So I was like, you have to go to your scrims. You have to do champs queue. You can probably cut your solo queue by 30%. And in that time, to make it productive, I want you VOD reviewing. I want you doing other things to replace the time missing that's going to be still productive for you, and probably actually, honestly, in my opinion, probably make you better than just playing 4 more solo queue games. Like most, especially in North America, man, most of these players, like when you talk to them about practice schedule, they sort of feel this outside pressure from fans and all to grind a lot of solo queue, and probably from their own internal bias as well. Like intrinsically, they feel like solo queue is the way. But I'm like, if you were to play 2 less, and I always ask them, if you play 2 less solo queues games a day and you put those spaced out, and you spent that time VOD reviewing other regions or doing something like, reading like something like watching a one trick play a champ that you want to learn, like any of that, right? Where it's not directly you playing. Do you think you'd actually improve versus potentially getting into a game where you're just about to get inted for 15 minutes and like lose your mind? Like, because everyone has that. It's always a coin flip. And they're always like, yeah, actually those two games probably don't matter at all. Like in the grand scheme of things, I probably get more value out of doing something else. But it's really hard to actually convince people to start doing that on a regular basis and adopt that as part of their strategy. I will say more veteran players VOD review significantly more than they play solo queue than most of the rookies, which is probably how it should be. But yeah.
No, that makes sense as well. I think that's the general sentiment in the League community as well. It's like when you think of Fudge, he's probably doing a lot of 1v1s and VOD reviews. When you think of Bjergsen or Jensen, that's probably what they're doing. But then when you think of Masu and Tomio as well, they're probably out there grinding solo queue. So it checks out. I did have a question about like standing desks. I don't really think LCS uses them very much, but I know some casters do, and I personally have a standing desk, and I think that helps me a lot because I work from home. So I tend to make sure like every couple hours I spend some time standing. It increases like overall energy levels, not necessarily worried about like the ergonomics. Obviously now after you talking about posture, it's like, oh, that makes sense. When I got a standing desk and I was changing, I didn't really feel as uncomfortable as before. But in terms of like standing desk versus sitting desk versus like an ideal height, is there an ideal height for a desk compared to like a person's body?
Yeah, it's going to be relative to their individual torso length, leg length, all that stuff. You basically want the desk height to be at a level where your forearms are horizontal and your shoulders are in a neutral position.
Oh, that's way higher than I thought.
Yeah, you don't want to be down here. You want your shoulders in a neutral position because down here, not only are you creating stress because the trapezius muscles are on full stretch the whole time, you're also tensioning all the nerves out of your neck. And that can cause a lot of irritation. The scalene muscles are tight. So you always want to think, okay, if I was to be in a completely relaxed position, my desk height should match that. And it should support that. So good ergonomics is just the environment supporting the best possible position for you. Right? You don't want to adapt your body to your station. You want your station to adapt to you.
That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, that's the funny thing. Like every time I talk to people about this stuff, like all these concepts, all stuff, like it's very simple. It's like everything is very logical. There's a reason why all this stuff makes sense when you think about it. It's just that most people don't have the education or knowledge about it. So I would say the most powerful thing I can give someone is education, because once they understand conceptually why your body works the way it does, you can sort of troubleshoot for yourself how all this stuff should work. I like standing desks, but only in terms of creating variability again. So standing all the time at work is not inherently better than sitting all the time. Both of them together is much better. You can stand for an hour or two, and then when you get tired, you sit down for an hour or two. For pros, not as viable because a lot of times, you want to recreate the scenario you're going to be in when you compete. So you want everything to be as uniform as possible. I will say C9 Academy 2 years, when Academy existed, C9 Academy played an actual stage match standing. They all, as a joke, raised their desks to standing level and they played the entire match. I came in, I was like, what are you guys doing? And Darshan said something like, well, I mentioned something about it, so we decided we're going to do it. And I was like, and they were smurfing Academy that year, so they were like messing around by the end of the season. But like, yeah, I thought they won the game. Yeah, I was like, yeah, we just won a game standing. I'm like, you guys are ridiculous. But yeah, so I mean, it's doable. I don't recommend it. Again, like I've always said, I think about it to the point of even you probably wouldn't have seen this, but when I was on stage with them at LCS finals in Raleigh, North Carolina, we actually measured all the desks, all the seats, all that stuff. We try to make it as consistent as possible to their practice room. We always want to have as many variables controlled as possible going from scrim to stage. So if you remember in 2020 during COVID, all stage games were played at home. C9 set a separate room aside. So they had, the practice room, they had a whole separate room where there was computers and all that, but set up as close as possible to what it would look like on an LCS stage. and they would actually leave the scrim room, go to this other room and play their match there to get them into that competitive mindset of like, this is a different game than my scrim. This is a stage game. This actually matters. They actually made a whole show of that. Like try to recreate the whole locker room to the stage feel, like I don't think there's a lot of teams doing stuff like that, but I think it really matters. I think all that stuff gives you maybe a 1% improvement, 2% improvement. All that stuff adds up in the long run. At the pro level, like, that's every little detail starts to add up. So.
And another thing that you mentioned that I really like is that your job is not only, it's not just your health. I'm actually focused on performance and improving the person's performance, which is interesting to think about. Usually it's like, oh, I'm injured or I don't want to get injured, so help me maintain my performance. But it's like, actually, I can actually help you improve that performance, which is really cool to think about.
It's like a personal hobby of mine. Like it's a personal interest, let's say. I think that human performance has always been something that really interested me, but being able to tie it into a lot of what I do in health and wellness and all that, but then also, training paradigms and all that, that's universal across humans. No matter the sport, there's parallels between esports, traditional sports, anything competitive, any human skill-based endeavor where you're competing, like there's parallels to all that stuff. So yeah, I love working with players on it.
So for people who want to learn more about maybe proper ergonomics or routines or habits that they should get into, I will link your stuff below in the video and on the screen, because I learned a lot, like I said, just watching a few of your interviews with some of the pro players and how they talk about the issues and how you even identify it. I was like, depending on the type of pain or the symptom that they have, you can kind of find out, oh, it's actually this type of injury versus that type of injury, which is very cool to see. But I'm a nerd, so but yeah, are there, is there like a healthyergonomicsforgamers.com website that people can go to, or like a YouTube channel? I know you stream, so there's that as well, but is there any other place to kind of educate yourself on what to do?
Yeah, I'm going to be definitely putting out more videos soon about that kind of stuff. It's been on my radar for this year. But also like I said, I work with 1HP, who's a group of esports health and wellness experts. They've worked with a lot of other teams as well. I kind of jumped on with them a couple of years ago, but they have a really good library of resources too. So 1hp.org, I believe, is their website, but they'll have an entire like database of videos and stuff like that. That's really good. Now, every clinician is different, right? So every single person has their own biases and views and opinions. I will say that we're mostly in line when it comes to a lot of conceptual stuff, a lot of philosophy, but there's going to be some nuance, right? The way I do things is not going to be exactly the same as, Matt or Elliot does things. And they're two very experienced PTs in the space. They've worked with, NRG, 100 Thieves, Golden Guardians, a bunch of other teams. So, like between us, me, and probably those three PTs, we have treated basically every tier 1 org in North America.
Whoa.
Across every game. Like just us.
Whoa, across every game?
Yeah.
Oh God, you guys have a monopoly. Dang.
but I mean, it's a monopoly, but it's because there's a dearth of qualified healthcare individuals who have gotten into the space early enough, right? And there's not that many teams, but yeah. So we basically.
Awesome. Okay, I can hear you now. Sorry about that.
No, I was just pitching our EPI program. So we created a program called Esports Health Professional Institute. Basically, we created a whole curriculum to pass on a lot of what we learned anecdotally and experientially to other clinicians who want to get into the space. So even though we sort of have a monopoly right now, it's mainly because we're the only ones doing it. I've had a lot of other clinicians reach out, like, how do I get involved? I'm like, I don't gatekeep anything. I tell them straight up, like, this is what I did. This is how you can get into it. These are resources for you. And we put together an entire like training program for foundations course. You can get certified in esports health, which is, there's a lot of like, certification program, whatever, but this is specific to healthcare professionals. It's just teaching the nuance about treating the esports professional or gamer that's very different than treating a traditional just sedentary desk worker population. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. I've treated a ton of people who just work in the office, obviously in my outpatient job. And it's very different than treating a gamer, because you don't tell gamers to work less. You don't tell them to change all their postures. You can't tell someone to cut their hours. You can't tell someone, I want you to change everything about your mouse and your keyboard. They're gonna play like crap for one game, and then they're gonna be like, I'm never doing that again. So it's a very, very different approach in treating this population, which I love. But yeah, so we definitely try to, I think there's a lot of specialization. I mean, I can go on all day about this stuff, but there's differences between playing an FPS and a MOBA in terms of what kind of injuries I would expect. There's a difference, in my opinion, there's a difference between treating an ADC and treating a support. They're both league players, but guess who has higher APM? Like
AD carry, cooking A all the time. Yeah.
There's the difference between treating a Riven or a Yasuo one trick and treating, Leona play. Like there's that level of nuance, even to the point where as out of interest, because I'm a nerd too. I loved like detail and studying this. I watched Blabber jungling once, and he didn't blink for over 45 seconds. Because he was staring at his map and going back and forth to his camp, looking at his map, like F1 keying, to go into different lanes, didn't blink for 45 seconds. And I was like, so knowing that a jungler or a support who has their eye constantly on the map may suffer from eye strain at a higher frequency than, a mid laner or something like that, who maybe is backing more frequently. There's all sorts of stuff, right? So I think there's just, you can take anything to the nth degree of detail if you really want to be specific. But it's super interesting to me, and I love what I do, and hopefully get to continue doing that.
Yeah, one of the reasons I actually wanted to reach out to you was we've had our fair share of people who, let's just say, are experts in a field. They come in and they think they know everything. But from watching you and seeing the fact that you're just telling these pros like, hey, this is all I know about it, right? This is like what I've done before. And I think people who just want to share and give out their best advice for free, that's a sign of like, hey, we genuinely care. It's not, we're not just in it for the money. Like the money is great, don't get me wrong, but we're also.
I mean, this is something I've always been very open about. This has never been my day job. I've never ever done esports full time. It's always been a part-time thing for me on the side that I do as a passion project. I've had a full-time job the entire time I've been doing this. So yeah, it's definitely not the money for me. Like it's something I just love doing. And yeah, I do get paid to do what I do a lot of times, but I was always, like when the recessions hit, I was taking pay cuts. I was, trying to I do a lot of work for free. I've worked countless hours for free. Someone needs something, like one of the teams like, hey, I know you're only scheduled for Wednesdays, but something came up. Do you mind coming by the house? I'm like, yeah, I'll drop by. Like at the end of the day, my mission was always deliver value to the orgs that I was working with, deliver value to the players. I still have a policy of answering DMs, all the time on Twitter. Like I do, if you ever see me on Twitter, like people will randomly just tag me and I'll try to give the best advice I can in a public forum without getting into a full-on assessment. I try to help out, but yeah, I think the space really needs it. And it doesn't cost me anything but time, and I like doing it. So yeah.
I really respect that, and I appreciate it on behalf of, everyone that has reached out or anyone that you've helped. I've seen that you've gone out of your way to just provide value, which is I really appreciate it, and I'm sure a lot of people appreciate it. And yeah, just thank you for coming on and sort of sharing a lot of that. I know a lot of things, clicked for me, and you may have said this like 10 or 15 different times before, but sometimes it's just like a couple different words that you use or a different way that you explained it really clicks with someone. So hopefully someone else, it clicks for them and they're able to take better care of themselves as well.
Well, thank you for having me. I do feel like a broken record a lot because I repeat myself a lot, but I do think every single time, if I can reach 10 more people, right, with the same message of like, this is how you take care of stuff, that's worth it. Because it's at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I'm bored of saying the same thing. It's how many people are actually learning how to take care of themselves on a larger scale. And that's all I can do is like keep trying to do it. So, and it's practice. I get better too. Every year I do this, I refine, like you said, I refine a little bit about my education. I refine a little bit about my thought process, or I see something new that kind of tweaks my philosophy towards something. So I think any expert in any field should be forever a student, right? Like they say, when you're constantly learning. If you stop learning, you might as well retire. So I enjoy it. Every time I get to talk about this stuff and think about it more, it helps refine my thought process towards it. So.
Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Jordan for taking the time out of his day to talk to me about, injury and injury prevention, and just giving really advice and trying to explain it and break it down so that it's very understandable. If you haven't, I have put a link in the description. Check out his channel. Like, don't worry about subscribing. I'm not going to figure out a sly little way of asking you to subscribe. Check out his YouTube channel, subscribe, watch his Twitch streams, ask him questions. He's always answering. Like he said, if you tweet at him, he'll answer. If you DM him, he'll answer. Really, we should be taking more care of our bodies because we're gamers. We're just gonna play, right? And we can do that very healthily and not injure ourselves. And unfortunately, until you're injured, you don't really care about it. But like he said, the prevalence of injuries is a lot more than you think. It's just they take really good care of it. So again, I reached out to him because this is something that I care about. It's something that we don't see it unless it becomes an issue, like with Faker, for example, last year. So it was something I was curious about, and he was very generous with his time to come on and talk about it. He talked with me beforehand and afterhand as well. So a huge shout out to him. And no me telling you to subscribe. So make sure to check out his channel and subscribe to him, not to me. Also to me, but mainly to him.